My mother was a writer indeed, and we lived here in Mumbai when I was a child. I left here when I was 9, so I come back not too often. I wish I came back more. But yes, I was born in Lucknow, which is my home city, and my first glimpse of the cinema was at this very venue, the Metro. We used to be allowed to come here to watch Disney cartoons, films like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Fantasia. I saw trailers for movies that I was absolutely enthralled by, which were Hollywood. I'll never forget, there was one image. There was a trailer for a film called Postman Always Rings Twice, and Lana Turner all in white. And I thought, this goddess has to be somebody I aspire to. And maybe that was the seeds of my ambition to be a part of this. How I had no idea how or when. But then we went to England, and I went to school there, and at school I was very lucky. We used to have a theatre tradition where we had play competitions, and I used to direct my house plays in competition with the others. I always chose subject matters which somehow irritate the authorities. For instance, I chose a scene from The Crucible, where a whole lot of girls see mocking one of the women on trial, one of the girls on trial, in front of the judges. Now, we're all at a boys' school. What did I do? I cast all the boys as girls, and the school chaplain was not amused. But I was, because simply I was infused by theatre, and I see no reason why this shouldn't happen. Anyway, through the tradition of school, I then went to university, which I have to tell you was my absolute joy. I was there 3 years in Cambridge. I was lucky enough to be a contemporary of some of the greatest actors who are now around. You saw Ian Mckellen in a section called A Touch of Love. That was a young Ian Mckellen, who is now known as Gandalf. He was at Cambridge with me. Derek Jacobi, Peter Cook and David Frost, who are well known. So I had this extraordinary experience of being able to work as a student director, and it was a result of that a long story here, but I won't bore you with it. The BBC saw some of my work. They asked me if I'd like to apply for a course at the BBC. After a lot of interviews, at one point they actually said to me, if we give you a staff position, would you be happy going to Bush House to broadcast to India and Pakistan? I said, excuse me, why would that be the case? And they said, well, it's a pensionable job, would you like it? I said, well, no, actually I wouldn't. You would be wasting your time and my talent. Oh, but arrogant somehow got me through that bloody door, because they said, well, we'll give you television, but I tell you this, no pension. After 6 months we can kick you out. Do you wish to risk that? Well, my lovely father, who was desperate for me to get a secure job back here, I had to persuade him. My mother was very much on my support side. Anyway, I got through to the BBC traineeship, and they did keep me on for 6 months as a trainee. And thank goodness they kept me on, so I ended up as a staff member. So I was the youngest person, as well as the only Indian-born director in the drama department at that time. Don't forget, this is way back. It was unheard of. It put me under a lot of pressure mentally. I did not try to show my nervousness, because my one worry was that if I did anything wrong, it would be ascribed not to anything of my skills, but where I was supposed to be from. Don't forget, the BBC at that time, don't forget, but I'll tell you, it was a very bureaucratic institution, very masculine. Women did not have much of a place except as secretaries and assistants. Which brings me to, I guess, Doctor Who. You saw the beginning. That was the very first significant show of mine. And it was produced by a wonderful woman called Verity Lambert, who was brought in by the head of drama then, who was a Canadian. This was unheard of too. We didn't have Canadians in those days. They were all Brits. Anyway, he was brought in, and he brought in this wonderful woman, and of course much rumour swirled around about how a woman could possibly produce. In those days, women were PAs and secretaries. And so she and I found ourselves very much in the minority. And we stuck together. And we thought that the BBC they didn't want to do Doctor Who. They didn't want to make it. They thought it was a rubbish idea. And so here's an Indian and here's a woman producing a show. We had no idea what the life of it would be. And all I can say is it's now in its 50th anniversary, which I'm going back to London to celebrate. So who had that idea? The studio space was half the size, well, a quarter of the size of this room. The BBC gave us the worst possible conditions. When we shot, by the way, I must let you know that I trained working with electronic cameras, 4 cameras simultaneously. So Doctor Who was shot on that basis of 4 cameras, shooting continuously, no cuts, no breaks, except the one moment when she enters the telephone box and comes into the set, which I tried desperately to make authentic and not too awkward. So that was, and when you saw that extract from A Passage to India, by the way, which was also shot simultaneously on 4 cameras, this involved an enormous amount of planning because each camera had to disappear while the other shot the person speaking and withdraw so that they wouldn't shoot each other. Now this is almost a mathematical equation. So you not only have to work with actors, you have to work with the technological aspects, which today, of course, everyone works with single cameras, digital, whatever. In those days, they were big cameras with cameramen and booms and coming in and out, sound effects, all happening simultaneously. All that business was shot. The black and white stuff that you saw was all shot on 4 cameras. I have to say that this was the most amazing experience. First of all, Forster was still alive and living in King's College, Cambridge. He did not want any of his works to be put on film at the time. And when the BBC decided they wanted to do the book, he absolutely put a stop on it. I do not want my book made into a film. You can use Santa Rama Rao's stage version. It was a 4-act piece with curtain. I mean, this is where the curtain comes down and the next act. So I actually went to see him and I said, Mr. Forster, he was a very irate old man who... You were in your 20s, he was in his 80s. Indeed, he was in his, yes, and I went to see him and he said, films, no. Nobody touches my work, it's full of pimps and prostitutes. So I said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that, but the fact is I'm doing a television and a 4-act play, quite frankly, doesn't suit. Would you at least let me use some of your book? Because, and he said, well, what? And I said, well, there's a scene where Mrs. Moore meets Aziz in the mosque. Now, in the play, they refer to it. Do you remember when we met? And I said, it's so vital, this relationship between this old lady and this man. It's so it's so vital to the rest of the film, of the play. So he said, all right, use it. And in fact, if you read the book, it literally jumps off the page at you. The dialogue is there written by Mr. Forster. So he let me use that. Then I said, Mr. Forster, at least can I open it up a bit? I mean, they go to the caves. Could I use the journey to the caves in the train? What are you going to do in the journey in the train? I said, well, just to show the transition. And the difficulty this Aziz has, he's got no money. He's put all his last rupees into this picnic. His servants are in the same carriage as the guests. I mean, let me at least show that awkwardness. All right, you can do it. So somehow or other we managed. But of course, if you see the piece, you'll see that it's what it is. What I would say, out of my sense of what I did with it, is that I was so fortunate to work with some of the best actors that Britain has to offer. You saw Dame Sybil Thorndike. Those of you young people probably wouldn't know who that is, but let me tell you, she was the first woman to perform St. Joan for Bernard Shaw. And this was a lady who understood India. She had been here, she had heard Gandhiji. When I was directing her, she knew absolutely what this woman was about. Mrs. Moore is quite a complex woman, strong but complex and mysterious. And there was a speech there which she didn't understand. And she said, Waris, I don't understand what I'm saying here. So I said, well, can I call Mr. Forster, because I don't think I can help you. So I rang Mr. Forster from the rehearsal room in London, after many coins being put in the phone box. He comes to the phone finally. I said, Mr. Forster, Dame Sybil doesn't understand some of this. Perhaps you could help. And he said, my dear boy, if I understood what I'd written, I wouldn't have written it. So I then went back to Dame Sybil and I said, unfortunately, Dame Sybil, this is what he said. And she said, we will make it work. And she did. So it's very interesting because Virginia McKenna, who played, she's one of my iconic movie stars from way back. She was a very well-known film star in England. And she just gave it that wonderful edge to a confused English woman in an alien landscape. So our limitations were that we did not have the facilities to come to India. This was all filmed in the studio. I was able to come here and do second unit shots just to establish things. I actually used my hometown of Lucknow for the town of that's supposed to take place, and I went outside the club and used the exterior of the club. I used some of the exterior of the caves in India, and then I had to get my characters. Now I'll tell you a very quick story about the caves, because the caves are actually built in the studio as well, which is not very satisfactory considering they're supposed to be seminal. If you know the stories, I hope you do know what I'm referring to. Anyway, these people go to a cave and some strange things happen. But our caves were built in the studio, and not particularly convincingly, although we tried. But I tried to find out, because there was a classic film called Black Narcissus made, and it was set entirely in India, but not shot there at all. It was shot in England. And I managed to find the last living person who had been involved on it. And I said to him, please tell me where you shot these incredible mountain scenes. And he said, Tunbridge Wells. So those who know Tunbridge Wells will know that it's a suburban, it's a very small city outside London. I went to look where he'd said, and there's an outcrop of stone called Toad Rock. And that's where Toad Rock had been the mountains of the Himalayas in this particular film, Black Narcissus. So if you shoot it in a certain way and look up at it, it looks higher. But if you look back that way, there's a row of semi-detached houses. So what I did was I got my cast, including Dame Sybil, to come and walk up the rocks. And I was praying that in the English weather we'd have some sunshine, otherwise we'd been killed, because it's supposed to be hot weather. And thank God the sun shone that day. So you've got a little shot of my characters walking up this rock, and then we cut into the studio as they enter the caves. Well,
then on you were with everybody.
It was my first chance to show that I could actually work with actors, yes. And it was a privilege, and these were some very good people. So, yes, it opened a door, because other producers at the BBC saw my work and then started giving me other classics to do. I did other things, like I did Shaun St. John, actually, but played by Janet Sussman, who subsequently did Hedda Gabler with me, with Ian Mckellen as well. So
you did quite a few stage things adapted to
that's a very
film.
interesting point, because some of these were stage adaptations that went into visuals and for camera. Another interesting thing is that quite a few of my works came from novels. I mean, Passage to India was a novel. Subsequently, there were other books. The Sandy Dennis extract you saw with Ian Mckellen was from a novel by Margaret Drabble. We called it A Touch of Love. So there was a transition from book to films. The challenge of working with them, you mean? Or the thing to do is not to be afraid. Not to be in awe of a person who has acquired a huge, has got a huge reputation.
Like Liz Taylor.
You don't want to, well, Liz Taylor, yes. Now, that brings us to a whole different area. By the time I worked with the Burtons, I already had established myself as at a television basically, and this was going to be their one and only television appearance. As it turned out, it was the last time they ever filmed together, because they divorced very soon after that. And I found it, their life started on Cleopatra with a bang and ended with me with a whimper. And Elizabeth was not an easy lady to work with, I must tell you. But Richard Burton I had enormous affection for. As a boy, I seen him as Hamlet at the Old Vic. He was the most charismatic person. This was before his Hollywood years. You have never seen such an extraordinary looking man with a voice like that on stage. It totally obsessed me. I was so impressed. So by the time I worked with him, unfortunately, a lot of the shine had gone off, and they were not in a happy place. Joan Plowright, by the way, you saw her in the scene with Jean Moreau, who, by the way, is another one of my icons. If those of you who have film goers or have anything to do with film history must remember Jules Jim. And she was a classic, and she was a very famous French actress and still is. Privileged to work with her. And actually, I'll tell you a quick story. I actually replaced another director on this film. I had to pick up the threads within 4 days. They'd already shot 2 weeks, and then it turned out that things weren't going right, and I was brought in, and it was not easy for me, but she and I got on incredibly well. Otherwise it would have been quite horrendous. So Joan I'd already worked with because she was married to Laurence Olivier, and I'd done something with them, and so I knew her, and in a way that helped. Nothing is easy. I can't say any. I'm sure. I mean, there are people here. There's Deepa there sitting. I think you can follow up with me. Couldn't you say nothing is easy?
So tough.
We have to make it happen. There are many things that I would like to do, and I've actually adapted as a book. I wanted to work here, but I can't find the right subject matter. I'm not a Bollywood person, and I'm not even known particularly well here in the Indian film industry. I would love to use this country and work with it, and because in my blood it's in me. I would love to find a project, but I can't really be specific. The point is, I've always been worried about why we cannot bridge the gap between the cultures. It's so difficult. English is the common language that we all communicate with in this country. I've been on the jury the last week watching regional films, and most of the films I had to read the subtitles because I don't understand the dialects. The only dialect I can understand is Hindi. So it just shows me how various this country is, how complex. So I have to obviously think about, even if I was trying to make something, it would have to be of a culture that I'm familiar with. My culture is from the north of India. I came from Lucknow. Obviously, that influences me. But I haven't yet found anything that I could really be specific about, except that I would love to work here. I wouldn't be able to settle because, to be honest with you, I have a career somewhere else, but that doesn't stop me from coming and working here for a certain period of time. So if I can find the right project or whatever, I would like to do that.
Waris, weren't you working on Cherry Orchard and adapting that to Lucknow at one point?
I have adapted it to a screenplay, but it's again very hard to finance because it's a family drama and people don't particularly want to invest in that unless there's some degree of extremism or violence or that nature. Maybe it'll happen, I'm not sure, but it certainly needs to be looked at and worked on, if it works. I have done an adaptation. Sixth Happiness, you saw that extract, which by the way is quite amazing. That location normally would never have been made available. It was done through some very circuitous diplomacy on the part of my sister, who was the producer at the time. I didn't tell anybody. But anyway, she got the location for us. But no, we did about, was it 10 or 2 weeks? 10 days. 10 days exteriors. The rest of all of it was set in, we built the set of the Bombay apartment in London. I had a wonderful production designer who came out with me, And she literally took back trunk loads of props and door handles and light fittings and God knows what to give it an authentic look. So we created, the whole point being the story was about a disabled boy. You could see he's in a wheelchair. It's a very interesting piece, but it's never been shown here. It's from a novel, again, adaptation. Firdaus Kanga is a Parsi boy. He wrote a book called Trying to Grow. He adapted that book into a screenplay with me. And then I couldn't cast it because it starts at the age of 8 and goes to 18. And I couldn't find 3 actors to play this disabled thing. So I turned around and said to the producers, you know what, he's so small that I'm going to actually cast him. And he's never acted before. But it's daring because he's not even 8. I mean, God knows he was in his 30s. But he's so small that we're going to have to tell the audience he's 8, have them accept that fact. In the first 10 minutes, it's a bit of a shock. But believe me, by the time the film is finished, they will believe in him. So he played himself, the character he'd written, being directed under fairly tough circumstances because he had to be carried everywhere, put into his locations. We were terrified his bones would break because he's brittle bone. There was a sequence where books fall down on him in the library, where we had to make false books because a heavy book might have broken his bones. The story is about minorities and people who are, in many ways, having to deal with it. India does not deal well with disabled people and wheelchairs, so most of the story is with him confined to his apartment. And somehow that we made it work. And I'm very proud of this film, but unfortunately it hasn't been able to be seen there. We showed it actually in Delhi, with much success. In fact, it was at screenings, and we had to repeat it because people wanted to see it. Oh, Jackie. Well, the royals, I think we didn't show the extract, but I did a series called Edward and Mrs. Simpson about the abdication of Edward VIII. So that was a TV series. Then we had Henry VIII, of course. I seem to have had a lot of 2 monarchs with 8. Yes, and then Little Gloria Happy at Last, which was based on a book rather, about the custody case between the Vanderbilts and the mother of the child Gloria, which it was as you can see, a very elaborate production. We had a brief glimpse of Betty Davis in it. Again, a lady who I had very huge privilege of working with. And I learned an enormous amount from this lady who was a consummate professional. She came to me and she said, I've had a stroke and one side of my face is not that great anymore. She said, could you help with the lighting? And I said, well, I will try, Miss Davis, but and she said, now don't worry, if I come into a room and this side is showing, I'll do it, but I just thought I'd mention it. And so when we actually went on set, she was absolutely wonderful. She came on set and she said to the cameraman, would you just put a little bit of something over there on me and what a bit of something there? Now this is a woman who knew her lights. And but she never argued. She did say to me once, she said, look, I only work till 6 o'clock. It's in my contract. If I'm in mid-sentence, I quit. Now, you're going to have to bear that in mind. So we were doing a big banquet scene where the camera tracks in from miles away, and I was working towards her, and she asked me to come forward, and I said, what is it? And she said, you're not going to finish with me by 6 o'clock. And I said, Miss Davis, I'm sure I will. She said, well, I'm just telling you. At 6 o'clock, she was exactly in mid-sentence, and she said, and I said, oh my God. And she said, listen, I will stay, because if I don't, you're in trouble. I'm not doing it for you, for them. She points to a group of producers all looking at their watches. I'm doing it for you. And I said, well, Miss Davis, when do you think we might finish? She said, 10 o'clock. And precisely at 10 o'clock we finished with her. So that's what I call a professional and a star. And a actress. The BBC, in their wisdom, have now made a fortune out of all of this. Their franchise for the Doctor Who is probably one of their biggest income makers. They are going to celebrate in the 50th anniversary in November, which is the first date of the first episode. And what they've actually done is to make a movie about the making of it, because they've actually allowed a writer to tell everybody that they were originally reluctant to make this show. He had to calm down some of the rhetoric, because he could have been quite tough in his criticism about the BBC at the time, because the executives were being terrible. And he's only used one character representing a terrible character. But they made a movie about the making of it. And believe it or not, there's a young British Asian playing Waris Hussein. So I had to see myself on the screen, played by this young actor, and my wonderful friend Verity Lambert, played by an actress. It was a very interesting experience, seeing a whole recreation of a time when I first started. And it's getting a lot of publicity, so I'm going back to celebrate the Brits are obsessed by it. Obviously you guys aren't, because you don't see it, but over there it's a huge, huge thing. And now it's in America too now. Yeah. Yes, my mother's birth centenary, she would have been 100 this year, because she was born 1913. I'm going back to London to celebrate her life and her work. Her writing. So we're trying to do it the best way we can. I would like to add that my mother was quite exceptional. Now people here, friends of mine who are friends of ours who knew her well, I would say that she was not just, she was a very beautiful woman, but that was probably a handicap, because everyone believes that if you have the looks, you don't have the brains, which is a terrible cliche. But the fact is, she did, and she was very sensitive and an artist. Oh, she wrote a book called Sunlight on a Broken Column, which I suspect that some of you young people may be studying or have studied. It is part of the curriculum. It's a novel, and also she wrote a book of short stories called Phoenix Fled. And most recent book that we just brought out, called Distant Traveller, was of an unfinished novel, extracts from her unfinished novel, plus short stories. That has just come out to celebrate her. I actually did direct in the theatre, as I said, at Cambridge, and I managed to get the privilege. I started funnily enough, my professional theatre production was in New York. I did a play at the Long Wharf Theatre in New Haven. I did Edith Wharton's The House of Mirth, and I got very nice reviews for it. And I took the reviews back to London and shoved them under Peter Hall's nose. He was their head of drama then. And I said, do I have to go all the way to America to direct stage? And he got somewhat cowed by this and offered me one play that I turned down because I didn't understand it. But then, out of the blue, I got this play called Half-Life, which I directed with John Gielgud at the National Theatre. So that also made me a first. I was the first Indian-born director to be directing at the National Theatre. And so theatre was very much a part of my life. And I try to go back whenever I can. I did do an adaptation of Christopher Isherwood's novel, A Single Man, before it ever became the film that it became subsequently. I also did a production of Queen of the Rebels in New York with Colleen Dewhurst. So I do try, if I can, to get the play, if I'm offered them. That's quite a story about how we actually managed to get President Clinton to actually take part. And by the way, that is not a set. That is the actual Oval Office. And I suspect no one will ever have access to it again under those circumstances, because to get into that place was already like getting into Fort Knox. And permissions had to be given. All our biographies were studied, and we had to go through lots of security. Anyway, he did agree to do it because he originally, this is based on a true story, the young girl who was actually, it was based on, her parents came to watch us filming as a part of the privilege of being there. She died about a week after this meeting. What actually happened was that he saw her, the real girl, being wheeled across the lawns of the White House where visitors can go. And he'd been on a jogging spree, in his jogging things. And he stopped and said, "What's happening?" And they said, "Well, this is a young lady who had come to see the White House. She's a history major at school." So he said, "All right, just let me go and shower and change and then ask her to come into my..." That was the true story. This, when it was brought to his attention, well, one of the it's very interesting. One of the producers of the film knew someone who knew somebody who knew the president, and you have to understand this was not done out of. He was about to apply for his second term, and this was quite a good way of approaching the public. So we went on to that approach, and what happened was that he agreed to do it. So in answer to your question, when he came on set, he'd been learning those lines off screen. He took one of the actors off and started going through his lines. His first take, which we did, I explained to him, I said, "Mr. President, would you like to, she's in a wheelchair, would you like to squat or kneel? I'm not sure what to ask you." And he said, "Well, squatting isn't quite right for a president, is it?" I said, "Well, you're tall enough to kneel, I suppose." He said, "Well, kneeling might be better." Anyway, he decided what to do. So I said, "What we're going to do is we're going to do it as a master shot. You come in and you do your scene with her, and then I'm going to have to do close-ups of you, and I'm going to have to ask you to do it at least twice, because you never know what might happen to the first take. If it gets ruined, we won't be able to come back." So he said, "That's fine." So we did the first take, and he was very nervous, and so we stopped, and I said, "Do you know what might be very good? It's actually if you started talking from the door to where she is, rather than wait to talk to her." And he said, "Okay, well, I'll do that." And that's what he did. You saw him do that. He starts walking and talking. And then he sat in front of her, squatted, I think. Then I said, "Mr. President," then he said to me, I was doing his close-ups, and he said, "Do you want me to match the first close-up to when I went down and the second one?" But I think I did. I thought, my God, this man's really canny. He knows his film. And so I then said, "Would you please, in front of her, we're going to freeze frame on you. So I'm going to count till 10 before I say cut after the dialogue." And I was in the adjoining room with all the staff, with the viewer, and he finished the dialogue, and I'm counting 1 and 2 and 3, and then I said, "I've got the most powerful man in the world kneeling to my command." And everybody around me started laughing. So that was an adventure. But he took direction, as I just told you. He's a very canny and very interesting man, and to be admired. So, very, very, it was a privilege. And subsequently I got a signed photograph from him, which I framed and kept. Because a lot of the British actors it's very interesting, they cross over much more easily. On theatre you've got to project. In film you've got to actually you've got to bring it all in. All it needs is for a director. What I found with British actors is they're incredibly well prepared. They will come on a set, and you may have already thought of what you want to do with them. And then they will say, "Well, you know what, I was wondering whether I could, do you think this would work?" And then you say, "No, actually, it might." And sometimes they're right, but sometimes they're wrong. And then you have to say, "Well, it won't work because of this, this, and this that happens subsequently." So they'll take that direction. I had the experience of working with Americans who work totally differently, because they don't come, they have some, obviously, I don't want to be universal about it, but I've had some who really do just depend on totally telling you, being told what to do, and be quieter or go faster, but there's nothing coming from the idea of, the whole point about the way I work, it's a democratic process. I want people to contribute to what's happening. There's some who just won't do that. I mean, Elizabeth was one of them. Elizabeth Taylor was brought up from the age of 7 to learn, to be told what to do. For instance, we never rehearsed anything with her. In fact, I had a stand-in who would come, and a woman called Maria, which was even more bizarre because we were shooting in Germany, and she had a black wig on to match with Elizabeth, and I would mark her moves. This is an example. I'd like you to move from there to the window on that line, from that, then to the fireplace, and then sit in a chair. Now, we'd mark all of Elizabeth's moves on blue, with blue. She would come on and say, right, where am I supposed to go? Oh, and I say, Elizabeth, I want you to move from there to there on that line, and then from there to the window, and then from the window to the chair. Okay. Looks at the lines. Right, ready. Not why am I going there? Why am I going to the window? Why am I sitting in the chair? No. So
she was not a method actress.
not at all. So I had to be very logical. But there were times when there was one day, like an idiot, I said, oh, this is working so wonderfully like clockwork. She said, really? Where do you want me to move? I said, well, there. Oh, no, she said, I want to move over there. And we pre-lit, taken quite a time to light. I said, oh, you want to move there? She said, yes. And I said, right, turn to the cameraman. How long will it take? 45 minutes. You see, she said, doesn't work like clockwork, does it? And she turned and walked off the set. That's how I had to work. But then I'm giving you an example. I work with people like Laurence Olivier, who instinctively knows exactly what to do, come in with his thoughts, and ingest the character, and then say, well, what do you want me to do? Jeanne Moreau. I went to her and said, Miss Moreau, I admire you, so please don't admire me. I want to be directed. Tell me what to do. What do you expect from me? Now, that scene you just saw with her and Joan was in one take. When I moved in on her and said, I'd like to do some coverage. Oh, don't, Waris, please don't make me do coverage. Didn't you like what I did? I said, yes, of course I liked what I did. Well, can I ask you one thing? Have the courage to just stay with it. And I didn't do it again. It was the one take. I had to risk it.
You were sort of known as a one-take man, weren't you?
Well, no, not always, Joan. No, I did made a fatal error once with Sandy Dennis and Ian Mckellen in A Touch of Love, where they did the most wonderful scene on a sofa, which started off in a close shot, and it pulls all the way back to a high shot, and it was so exquisite and so beautiful that I said, that's it, we're not going to do it again, we're moving on. And we moved on. The next day my producer called me and said, Waris, big scratch on the film. We have to reshoot. So I realized, don't ever be complacent about, you really got to cover yourself, otherwise you can be in trouble.
That's film.
So that's film for you. Theatre you can't do it anyway because there's no mistakes to be made. Television in my day, which was shot continuously, could not afford too many mistakes because we couldn't retake very many times. We had to continue until somebody fell dead or forgot their lines or something. I consider myself a creative person, and I love being with a group of people who are all working towards one end. I know that as a director you're calling the shots, you're the captain of the ship, to use a metaphor. The fact is, there's something quite wonderful about making something happen which you had once imagined with just on a page, and now you're bringing it to life. And bringing it to life sometimes where you didn't imagine it would happen, because locations dictate some of the way you shoot. You read a script and you don't even know where you're going to find the location, and then suddenly you find where it is, and suddenly the environment and the actors and the personnel, not just actors, crew members. I just love. One of my favorite films is Day for Night, which is Truffaut's big tribute to being a director, and that is a love poem to filming and to making films as a director. And to me, that is what I admire about being a part of the system. I'm very lucky to have got in that up to this position, because it's a very difficult thing. We are all judged in ways unfairly at times by critics who, it's easy to dismiss something. It's easy to walk off away from something. It is not easy to create what you are doing. It takes a lot of time and effort, and you need the support of people in order to gain their respect. I've been on sets. I've actually worked with a couple of directors as an actor, by the way, funnily enough. They've suddenly asked me to do bit parts in their films, which was quite fascinating. And I watched them work. They were actually quite nice, but I've been on sets where directors have shouted and made a huge scene and been the center of attention, and that is not what I call being a director is. I am very much a person who depends on the people I've chosen to work with me, because it takes time to also, not only do you have to cast the right people for the roles, but to cast the crew around you. A cameraman, for instance, can make or break a director with his attitudes. I had 2 occasions where I was on for one film in Finland. It was supposed to be a gulag saga, and we were in this godforsaken place up in Finland, and we were in a hotel bar, and there was this wonderful Irish gaffer. He's about 6'2", and I went past the bar because I didn't drink. I went to my room, and he said, "Oh, Mr. Hussein, please come over here for a minute." And I said, "Oh, yes, what is it?" He said, "Do you like your cameraman?" And he said, "You know, because I worked with him in the past." I said, "Oh, the gaffer had worked with him." He said, "Do you like him? I mean, what do you think of him?" He said, "What do you think of him?" I said, "He's all right." He said, "Be careful. He's out to get you." And I realized that the man who was supposed to be giving me the images was not doing what I wanted. And on our first day's location, we turned up at a snow landscape. I mean, it was vast expanse of snow with trees in the distance. And we'd already scouted it. And I said, "I think this is where we are." And producers, by the way, all Americans in fur coats, standing looking at their watches. And I said, "I think this is where we were." And the cameraman said, "Oh, you've changed your mind, have you?" Changed my mind in this vast landscape? Where would I have gone? But, you see, a little bell rang somewhere. And I said, "No, Richard, no, Dick, we decided somewhere in this area, it's not as if it's vital. Let's just set the camera." So this was the beginning. Then it's supposed to be a very cold venue, freezing cold. The images came back, because in those days rushes had to be gone off and sent somewhere and developed and sent back, and we'd watch them in some hotel room. It looked like a Rembrandt painting, all browns and dark, very warm. I said, "Richard, what are we doing here? Why is this looking like as if we're in a medieval movie instead of in the cold?" Well, I said, no, we've got to change this right away. So we discussed it. Then I realized there's only one way of dealing with Richard. So I called him in. I said, "You know what, I'm sorry to say that," this was after I spoke to the gaffer, so I knew how to get some strength out of all this. I said, "I have to tell you that things are not going well, and just to put you on notice that I have made inquiries for replacing you." That shocked him. I said, "Now, do you want to leave because you have every reason to? You're not happy here, or would you like to do what we're trying to do?" And he just shut up. It turned out that he had a very big problem with his family life. He had just done a very big feature film in America called Body Heat, which had done very well in the cinemas. Anyway, we managed to, but what I'm trying to explain to you people is that it's all very well being a director, but if you don't have the right people with you, you can be in a mess. I wish I could give you a full account of my reactions because I'm limited in what I have seen. Let me say that I've just recently witnessed all these films. I am impressed very much by the quality of performances if and when they are given the right direction. I've just seen 12 films, and most of the performances I think are superb. but there are certain times when you know that that particular actor possibly hasn't been given the right direction, right? So I would answer that question by saying I think there's huge potential in this country. After all, there's a tradition here. The problem is that there's a division between the kind of films I'm talking about and the sort of people I've worked with, and the sort of films that are being made commercially. Because there, it doesn't really matter how good or bad you are as an actor or an actress. It's how you look and what you can do in terms of what is required of you. So it's a question of acting, it's a question of being a performer for huge audiences. I personally think that there's potential in this country, but acting is not automatic. You can't just turn somebody into an actor. They have to have something in themselves which you have to allow to bring out. As a director, I can tell very quickly whether someone's going to be able to act or not. And that's the whole purpose of auditions. We audition, all of us directors audition a lot of people for those few roles that are going to be played in the films. And it's very sad. When I was auditioning in New York for a project, and we were running over time in our schedules because they'd given 5 minutes per person, and they were all sitting and lining up in corridors, and the assistant director came to me and said, "Waris, you've got to keep going because you must realize this is a cattle call." It's the first time I heard a word called cattle call for human beings. And I thought this absolutely appalling, because you don't treat people like cattle. And I said, "I'm sorry, but I don't see these people as cattle, and you're just going to have to put up with my talking to each one of them. Some of them may have prepared themselves, come from miles, maybe spent sleepless nights looking at the script, and I'm telling them to get out because I'm late." So, actually, out of all this, I must tell you who we cast. It was a young girl called Margot Kidder, who I gave her first break to in films, and she ended up in Superman with Christopher Reeves. So, not because of me, but she certainly got her break with this. So, that happens. But going back to your question, I think Indian actors, there is potential in this country, but I can't be more particular about it. Well, Bollywood is, as you know, it's its own master, so I can't really... Look, the people who go to the cinema in England and in America are basically the Indian diaspora from South Asia, and maybe the Middle East. Most Western audiences are not familiar with Bollywood films. It's a simple fact. I keep reading in papers how these major stars have gone to London and had huge triumphs. In London, you never hear about them except in places like, in the outskirts and Ilford or, that's not London. So, but I can't answer for that. All I know is that Indian actors are respected when they're given certain roles. I mean, we had Irfan Khan in Life of Pi. Suddenly he's been recognized. The ignorance factor in the West is because Bollywood, their films are too long, they're too they're too complicated. If I keep saying to people, simplify this and still present it, because actually Bollywood numbers are some of the best ever filmed. You can't, they're like Busby Berkeley numbers, it used to be in America. So I can't really answer that except to say that when an Indian actor is given a role where he is allowed to express himself, but there are very few of those around. I mean, how are you going to integrate Indian talent with stories that don't have scripts to accommodate them? But people are aware of Bollywood as such, but I can't answer for individual people themselves. All of you saw, I'm sure, Slumdog Millionaire. Nobody had ever heard of any of the people in it. Obviously, a lot of them are known anyway. But that's their degree of knowledge about India. Of the West, I mean.